Hey, this is Dave from metalepidemic.com. Thank you for checking out our YouTube video. Please feel free to hit the subscribe button below if you like this type of content, and we hope you enjoy the review.
We've been baited. We're all breathing dirty air, and I know we all care. Buried under.
What is up, guys? Dave here from Metal Epidemic. We're just commenting on how swanky Duncan looks for this review. He's really dressed up.
I look like a cross. I look like a bad magician. You know what I mean? Like one of those ones that you paid money for to show up and entertain your party, and then I come in and you're like, he only knows one card trick, and I know it as well. So, you know what I mean?
Pick a card, any card. Not that one.
Yeah, not that one. No, the one that says the one with the little bend on the end. That's the one you've got to. That's the one you've got to pick. 3 clubs. What do you mean it's not 3 clubs? Oh, fucked up. So there we go.
Yeah. That aside, we're here to do a review of the new Sons of Alpha Centauri album. This is their new album. It's called Push. It's going to be released on August 27th. Via Exile On Mainstream. If you caught our recent YouTube reaction, we checked out one of their latest singles. It was called Sometimes. And you may have heard me mention that these guys contain members of other well-known bands. However, what I didn't know was this is actually the first album with those members. Bassist Nick Hannon said, Sons of Alpha Centauri has a split personality. This is most certainly our darker and heavier side. We grew up on 90s alternative rock, and to harness our vision with the purveyors of the Sacramento post-hardcore sound will make this a true landmark release, and we have taken it to the extreme, collaborating with Mitch and Jonah. That being Jonah Matranga from Far and Mitch Wheeler from Will Haven. He also said, we've always been interested in working in a collaborative manner, so despite the epidemic, we've continued building and expanding our spectrum of musical genres that we want to experiment with. This is an exciting phase for us, and integrating the guys from Sacramento and their heritage is phenomenal. So these two members, this is the first release they've been on. Actually, I went back and I checked out the 2 albums before. They released their first album in 2007 and then an album in 2017. And then when I started listening to those albums, there was actually no vocals on them at all. Completely
right.
instrumental up until now. So, as I said, Jonah Matranga now provides vocals throughout the album, which was tracked in Sacramento, California, with Lance Jackman behind the boards. Mixing and engineering duties were overseen by Dan Lucas, while Nick Zampiello, who worked with Kevin and Converge, mastered the album. So, Push. I think, like, musically, this is. I think we mentioned it on the review. This is very 90s sounding. Huge swaths of Deftones on this, and you could hear it on that track that we listened to. You hear it in a lot of the melody, but it's kind of interspliced with a bit of kind of post-hardcore and a more kind of alternative kind of metal sound. The Far influence obviously is fairly obvious as well, but I think that was always going to happen when you have a guy like Jonah fronting the band. But it instantly kind of put me into that kind of late 90s sound the band had. And even the production kind of fits with that kind of era. I do remember on the reaction, Duncan did say this was my jam. So how did the rest of the album go for you? What did you think?
It kind of went how I thought it was going to be honest with you. There's maybe one exception to that, which is track 7, Saturn, which feels like it's almost from actually, this could be interesting because I remember this band getting mentioned recently, and it used to like Voltron and Up Against Them. There is a heavy influence from Smashing Pumpkins on this release. It's on the heavier side, and it's definitely not on the vocal side of things.
Yeah.
But like chord progression and even the guitar sound in parts is like a heavy Smashing Pumpkins. So
Yeah.
that once again fits in with what you've described there. And Saturn's probably the best example of that. The Willhaven stuff is there. It's just not got the ferocity.
Yeah.
I think that's what the specific. There's particular rhythms and guitar chord choice progressions which are in once again Camp Willhaven. But you are right. If you were to liken this to any one specific band as to get someone in, you would say, do you like Adrenaline Around the Fort era Deftones?
Yeah.
And if the answer to that question is yes, then you will love Push by Sons of Alpha Centauri, because that's what kept hitting me. Even lyrically, this kind of dabbles in their kind of territory. Tracks like Boys and Girls, which I'm sure Deftones have a song called Boys and Girls. If they don't, it's called something else, but it's about boys and girls. All that's in there. And interesting enough, the track that we heard for the reaction, which I think is the opening track, is Get the Guns, which I found really, I liked it, but when I listened to after, it's very, very, very repetitive.
Yeah.
And it works fine as an opener, but I would say to push that as a single seems kind of strange to me, because it's maybe the least inspired track on the album. I think the rest of the album is actually much more interesting, much more diverse as well. I love the production. I think you hit the nail on the head, Dave. They have somehow harnessed the power of late 90s era, alternative and new metal production, and that's in there for sure. It has a bit of grain, has a bit of fuzz in there. It doesn't sound pristine, or it's designed for a huge market. There's something kind of a little bit indie about it, and I kind of love it for that. Vocally, yeah, you know what you're getting here. Far End Deftones have always been kind of like that, and they've collaborated on so much stuff because they kind of sound the same. Not identically the same by the stretch of the imagination, but if you were to kind of blind listen certain elements of certain songs, the bands are at times fairly interchangeable, maybe less so nowadays, but certainly in this time period, which is what they're aiming for. Lyrically, I find it's interesting. I don't always necessarily think the lyrics totally make sense, but I get the point they're conveying, and I think it's as part of that sound. It's got a kind of almost like the emphasis isn't there on what he's necessarily singing about as opposed to how it makes you feel.
Yeah.
And I think they capture that really, really well. I am a mark for this sort of, we use that a lot, but I really am a mark for this era of music, two, the bands that this is like. It's a huge Willhaven fan, still am. I'm a huge Deftones fan, still am.
Yeah.
My favourite Deftones album is Around the Fur. So you can imagine this is hitting a lot of sweet spots for me. My only gripe with it is I think this album is too short. It's like 35 minutes and it's only 9 tracks. And interesting enough, when Saturn kicks in 3 songs from the end, that's when I got this, and it's only on that song, this other side of them, which I think they could have experimented with a lot more on this album to its benefit, because it's the one bit that sounds less like all the bands we've already mentioned and more like something certainly kind of 90s alternative. And I would have liked a bit more of that. That being said, this is one of these bands where you can definitely say they are a sum of their parts.
Yeah.
Like every band they are collaborated from and influenced by are like clearly audible on this release.
Yeah.
And in a lot of respects, I like that. I think that opening song, like I say, can be a bit repetitive. I think it's maybe not the best on there, but it certainly sets you up for what you're going to get. And the rest of the album builds on it. So yeah, I really liked this album.
Cool.
And I am glad that you've now quantified that situation, because I kind of thought, how would I, like, to me, like a Willhaven side project or a Far side project, I should know that, and the fact that none of us were aware of it at all and they'd had albums out before kind of confused me, and that now makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, I enjoyed it.
Cool. Kyle, what did you make of this?
No, I'm kidding. I quite liked it, actually. No, it But I agree totally with everything you said. Or actually, there's not much I can add. No, I think the first song was definitely the weakest of the bunch, and I did think it was a bit weird to open with that.
See, I'm disagreeing with both of you in this one.
Really?
I think it's just too repetitive.
Yeah,
I think
I
it's
thought
like
exactly
it's just
the
the
same
same.
thing,
I find
It
that
just keeps
I'll get on
as
to
an
that.
opening track, qualified as an intro track. That's
It reminded
fine.
me a bit of Marilyn Manson in a way, and I don't know why. I think it might have been
said that
something
at
in the
the time, I
vocal
think.
tone, and I
Yeah.
think it was just like,
Yeah.
and I mean, I used to like Marilyn Manson, of course, before he went weird and bad.
Weird.
There are like the 3
Yeah,
albums
like-
that are really good, and all the rest are shit.
Also, I'm sure "Get the Guns" is a Marilyn Manson lyric. So
Yeah, it probably is. It probably is. That's probably what it is. And I was like, okay, that's an interesting thing. And then it sort of, I don't know, it never came back. And I was like, all right. But I also heard a hint of like Placebo.
there is. Yeah,
Yeah.
I would say
In
you're
there,
right.
definitely. I was like definitely getting, I mean, massive Deftones vibes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was smothered all over it. You can't get away from that. And I was like, there's some Placebo in this too. But
Yeah.
what I love
It's that
the most,
90s alternative
Yeah.
sort of sound. That
Yeah.
British 90s alternative. I mean, Placebo were one of the biggest bands. So.
yeah, they were. I
makes
quite
sense.
liked it. It was a good mix. It was like it wasn't ferocious, but it was heavy enough, and it got pretty dissonant with a lot of guitar work. I like that they didn't just hold a dissonant chord and just riff on it. They actually just placed it in parts in the riff, and it was really well done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was very tasteful, I'd like to say. And the bass, it was audible throughout the entire album, and I just love that about it. Just albums with bass you can hear just makes me happy. And I got a lot of things to say about the mix. Coming from a producer standpoint, this is impeccable. Absolutely fantastic. There's a little bit of studio fuckery, I think, but it's tastefully done. It's not like overly done like I've complained about before.
Yeah.
If there is any, and I think there might be, it's done like just either to fix things or just like enhance it a bit and give it some more power, which is, it's fine, I guess.
Yeah.
It's been done for 25 something years. So it's all right, it's fine, but I mean, I really like the way the sounds. It's definitely nailed that sort of 90s indie heavy post-hardcore sound, and it's done it super well. It sounds very natural. Everything sounds like it's been played and hasn't been fucked with. So like anybody else listening to it, be like, yeah, it sounds really good. And you can hear when the drums hit different times, and you can hear all these little things here and there that just gives the songs more character and more personality. I think it's really good. So
Yeah.
and actually the tone of the vocalist I quite like. It's got a bit of range, so I quite enjoyed that. It wasn't just a one note pony, if you know what I mean.
It's one of those things, I was thinking about this. If you were, specifically, we talk about this when bands try and retroactively capture a sound. If you gave me this album, Dave, and said that you were in America and you were in a CD shop and someone said, oh, do you like Around the Fur? This came out the same year. And I listened to this, I would think this came out the same year.
Yeah.
Genuinely, I think it's that authentic to the era that they're going for.
sure.
And it doesn't feel cynically like they've done that either. It just feels like that's what the music required, so that's what's there.
Yeah, I agree.
But it still stands up to today's modern
100%.
production practices as well. It doesn't sound like it was, you listen to the first Korn album and it's like, yeah, it's heavy and stuff, but it's like a bit, the
Messy.
production's messy and all this stuff, and it's like, yeah, okay, it wouldn't hold up today, but it's still awesome. But no, I think it holds up, but it definitely captures that 90s sound.
Yeah. I think the band, don't take this the wrong way, but I can totally see why they've now opted to include vocals in their sound. As I said, I did listen to those two previous albums and they were interesting to a point, but I think the addition of the vocals kind of not only adds like a whole new dimension to their sound in terms of tone and catchiness, but I think it's really helped define an actual sound for this band. I couldn't really tell what kind of band they were trying to be before. It had elements of the sound on this album, but it felt a little directionless at times. And I think adding those vocals has taken their sound and kind of molded it into something that feels more focused. I think Jonah Matranga has such an interesting voice as well. I think it was really hard to go wrong here. Every track on this, I was kind of honed into what he was doing. And I said on the reaction, his voice is built for these kind of really kind of soaring melodies. And even when he does kind of push it into something more aggressive, it has this really natural kind of crackle to it that starts to emerge, like as it gets to breaking point. And I absolutely love that. I think it's such a cool characteristic to have in a vocalist. I think what kind of impressed me the most about this release was the fact that this doesn't sound like an album that's like from a new incarnation of Sons of Centauri. I think I know the core members have been together for a while, but the fact they've brought in a new drummer and added a vocalist and sound like this right off the bat is quite impressive. And they know exactly how they want to sound. You know, this isn't a band that's really experimenting with a new sound or trying to be cutting edge. This sounds like it's heavily influenced by the 90s, and it's, I think, the nostalgic kind of part of me got a real kind of kick out of that, because I grew up listening to most of these bands that influenced this one, and I think they nail that sound really well. I think Get the Guns is a fantastic track. It's one of my favourites on the album. When I listened to the album, I kind of thought, I was surprised that it wasn't the first single they released. For me personally, I think it's such a strong track on the album, especially vocally. I think it's got an amazing hook to it that's absolutely seared into my brain right now. As do a lot of the tracks though on this album. I think there's a lot of big hooks on it. I liked the kind of slightly kind of chunkier tone on The Enemy. You can really hear that like adrenaline era Deftones sound coming through on the heavier guitars, and the same with the title track. They really kind of lean into that alternative metal side in those tracks, and I think it works, or those tracks work really well as a kind of contrast against tracks like Buried Under, which the tempo's a bit slower and the chords have that kind of like reverb soaked kind of fluidity to them. Also, like the tracks are really like perfect kind of single length. I think like the longest track on this is like 4.5 minutes, something like that. So they never really outstay their welcome, and they mostly follow a fairly kind of traditional structure. There's no like major surprises in terms of where the tracks kind of go, and that can be a good thing. But sometimes I did feel towards the end of the album, certain tracks maybe could have been doing with a bit of a detour or a change to make things a bit more interesting. Boys and Girls had a good vocal hook, but musically it did that track did feel a bit repetitive to me. And Saturn, I'm not sure how I feel about it.
Saturn's the one that's different from everything.
Yeah,
it's the one that has the. You don't like the Smashing Pumpkins,
no,
so
I
that
do
kind of makes sense to me because it's the one that sounds most like
it's
later 90s era Smashing Pumpkins.
Yeah, it's probably one of the most kind of synth heavy tracks as well.
It's really bright sounding
as
well. You know, it's happy.
Yeah.
The rest of the album isn't necessarily happy sounding.
Yeah. I don't know. It just didn't really go anywhere for me, that track. They followed it up with Dark Night though, which was probably my second favourite track of the album. I think it's got an amazing chorus, a real earworm.
Swear to me. That's the Dark Night, isn't it? No.
And I think I like that track, how it kind of continually builds into something a bit heavier with a kind of groove to it. I can imagine that track going down really well live. I think if you're a fan of that like 90s post-hardcore alternative sound, then there will be a lot on here you'll enjoy. I don't think it's anything necessarily you've not heard done before, but I think they're really good at it, and as songwriters it's really well delivered. And I love the fact they've stuck with a more kind of retro kind of organic production. You know, it really suits this sound, but as Kyle says, it still feels up to date at the same time. I think had they gone with a really like super modern production, it would have sucked a bit of that nostalgia out of it. So I'm glad they stuck with that sound, and it's really good to hear Jonah doing like what he does best as well. I think he has got so much character to his voice. It's very individual, and I think it pairs up with this sound brilliantly. So yeah, a lot to enjoy in this. Not a lot that I disliked on this album at all, to be honest. What did you think then, ratings for this album? What did you think, Duncan?
This is a 4. I really liked this.
Yeah.
I think there's plenty to make me want to come back to this, and more than enough to make me want to hear more of them.
Yeah.
And I hope this is a case of we now have the component parts that we need, and we're going to continue doing stuff rather than this is an experiment. We've brought in, vocals for this album, different drummer for this album, but we're going to go. I've not heard the old stuff, but you're generally a good indicator as to whether or not it is worth my time going back. And it kind of sounds like maybe this is the sort of stuff I'm looking for. So yeah, I think this is like I say, I'm a bit of a shell for this. I don't know how modern audiences who've grown up in an era where they, this sound Like if all you've listened to, we mentioned Deftones, but if all you've listened to is like the last 2 Deftones album, I don't know if this necessarily, probably a bit confused about that, but if you are of a certain age, and you do have an interest in the component parts, I think this delivers in a nice way.
Yeah.
And I keep coming back to that. It's not cynical sounding. Like, it'd be so easy just to throw members of all these different bands in, and then one song sounds like Willhaven, and one sounds like Far, or like that. It sounds cohesively like this is how it's supposed to be, and I really like that about that. So 4.
Nice. Kyle?
Same rating, same reasons.
Nice. I shall join you on that rating. It's a 4 from me as well. I really enjoyed this. Nostalgically as well, it just kind of makes me feel a wee bit warm and fuzzy inside. This one drops on August 27th. It's out on Exile on Mainstream. The album is called Push. If you want to check these guys out, it's facebook.com/Sons of Alpha Centauri. I will put a link in the description below to their Facebook and to their Bandcamp page so you can check out the album and let us know what you think about it. That's the review. Thank you for checking it out. Much appreciated. We will be back with another review very soon. But until then, take care. Speak to you soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
She's worked harder for longer.